Oh, okay.
Okay, somebody, Behemoth X, let us know, and Seamus, let us know there was no sound.
Okay.
Can you let us know if it's okay now? Can everybody hear us okay? Just want to get confirmation that everybody
Sure.
can hear us now. It should be, we should have, uh, hey, Seamus says, does that mean you hear us now?
Right, right.
I just want to get confirmation here. Okay, I hear you now. Okay, excellent. And
Great.
can you hear SMQ as well? Uh, if you could say something, SMQ.
Sure. Yeah. I'm 1, 2, 3.
Okay. Okay, awesome. J
Okay.
says good, but it's doubling up.
Hmm.
Okay, 1 second here. Maybe if.
Oh, I can hear you just fine. You're not doubling up at all. They can't hear either of us or just you. Okay.
Okay, we should be good now.
Okay, perfect.
Okay,
Cool.
everything is good. Sorry about that,
All right,
everybody.
so
False start. Okay,
bringing
everybody,
back. All
welcome.
right.
Welcome to the live stream today. To this episode today, we're going to call The Matrix Has You. And I'm Jeremy Crow, and we have special guest SMQ with us today. And if you aren't aware, this is only the second time SMQ has ever revealed his face. So we have the honor of him revealing his face to us today on the live stream. Um,
That's right.
we had, thank you very much for that.
Mm-hmm.
So we had a podcast before, you and I, on your channel.
Hmm.
And your channel is really covers some really interesting concepts. And just so the people kind of know who you are and the context and everything of this discussion, you had your first big YouTube video describing a concept you called "We All Died in 2012."
Hmm.
If you could just kind of give a brief overview of that idea, then that would be awesome.
Yeah, yeah, no problem. At the time, I had just a couple dozen, if that, Twitter friends. We were following each other, and I maybe I had 100, maybe 200 followers on YouTube, and I think it was maybe even my second video. I just, I synthesized a bunch of different ideas that were floating around from various disparate sources at the time, and I put it together to the "We Died in 2012," and I kind of synthesized that on, overlaying the Mandela effect as well, meaning, oftentimes people talk about the future, and at that time I was drawing the conclusions about, circular time versus linear time, so it was kind of a statement on, everyone's looking forward to the future and it never happens. So it was saying that, we're already dead. It already, the apocalypse didn't, we're not waiting for it to happen next week or next year or whatever. It's already happened. And it happened to be at the time, the idea was there was, I think it was like a thread on either, it was one of the Chans, and then there was a thread on Reddit. And they had different disparate ideas about how the world had already ended. One was saying that the world had ended and we were on a server and that the server was corrupt, so they went ahead and stopped the process. And then another one had said that the world had ended actually, I think it had ended with and I had used the term earlier on quite a bit, a mass extinction event, and I said that over and over again. So you had two kind of competing ideas. So what I did was kind of synthesize those with the Mandela effect. And, if anybody who's familiar with the Mandela effect, depending on what school of thought you are, you're either mass remembering things or the past is actually changing. And we can get into the quantum physics of it, how that's, a remote possibility versus, mass misremembering, and how the Mandela effect itself actually evolves and has evolved over time from kind of an obscure, meme all the way into something that's much, kind of a pop culture phenomenon kind of thing. But so I took all those things and kind of blended it up and then just put out a video. We died in 2012 saying the world has already ended. It ended in a mass extinction event. And as time goes on, and I talked about the ripple in a pond, saying the rock hit the ripple in the pond, and the pond is reality. And as the rock hit and the ripple goes out, it'll slowly dissipate into nothingness. And as it dissipates, the representation of the time and existence dissipating, it'll become more chaotic. And at the time, I had no idea it would get this chaotic. But at the time, right, this was what, 3 years ago? So it was early 2017. And well, I guess 4 years ago at this point. And things were just starting to get really weird, at that point. Things were just starting to get a little kind of off. So I guess, you know, that, some people found some kind of meaning and relevance to the "We Died in 2012" concept. And before I knew it, the video had taken off, and it was, at the height of it, I think it was 10 to 20,000 views a day, and it just kept going and going and going. Yeah, it's at 175,000 views now. Granted, for a lot of the big channels, that's nothing. Particularly sponsored channels or channels that are part of networks or something. A million views is nothing. But, relative to my size, it was a monster. It was actually a little unnerving, and it got me a lot of attention I didn't want to get. I started to get threats because then I started to go with it. I said, okay, I've got a viable concept here that people are interested in. And I started to build more and more and more on the concept of we're already in the afterlife. And I started to get a lot of pushback from that, to say the least. That's to put it mildly. So I decided to go ahead and end the series, and then I moved on to some other projects and things. And then I started, after I met Buster and Chick, we formed kind of this team, and we started to get into more hard research. And that's sort of where things have kind of left off from there.
Well, yeah, the Mandela effect has gotten a lot deeper than just uh, misremembering things, as some
Hmm.
people
Hmm.
describe it.
Right.
It's a lot more than just a list of things that you probably remember wrong.
Hmm. Correct.
And there's even the idea that we have shifted to a new universe.
Hmm. Yes.
So all these ideas are kind of tying into the simulation theory as well.
Hmm. Correct.
So what do you think is the strongest tie into all these ideas with simulation theory?
Well, I think personally, simulation theory is probably one of the leading candidates in terms of probabilities, because it gets a lot of scientific backing for, all kinds of different reasons, including the quantum theories that are out there, the double slit experiment. You can get into the Fibonacci sequencing and everything that's out there, cymatics, how sound, vibration, and frequency, everything that, an occult audience is that second hat to them, to a broader mainstream audience or a materialist audience or a scientific audience, these are all very, very new concepts to them. So, I sort of worked my way backwards into, uh, the occult, because I started out with just the Mandela effect and the pop culture references. After I started getting a hold of some of the harder FOIA documents and harder papers, I started to branch out into all kinds of other things. And that's really what happens if you really start to really investigate this kind of material. It branches out into it doesn't seem unexpected now that I'm what, 4 years into the material. But at the time, you start reading the documents, and then you start reading the books, and you start reading and listening to the speeches of the various experts that are out there, and it's just the things that are presented to you as a mainstream person that doesn't look into something like this, the ties that are out there are counterintuitive to what's actually is going on with these experts, what they believe, what they say to one another, particularly when you start getting as deep as global intelligence agencies. They're saying in.
What I was about to get into as well,
Mhm,
because it's interesting the arc that your particular path has taken in this research.
mhm,
That it kind of started out with a theory that was connected very deeply with simulation theory,
mhm,
where the idea that we all died in
mhm.
2012, and that
Correct.
maybe we are on a server. Maybe we were alive, but now maybe we're in some sort of cryogenic, like Vanilla Sky type,
Mhm,
or like something out of like a Philip K. Dick novel or something. Uh,
mhm,
that maybe we're in some sort of cryogenic uh, storage after we've died, and that we're all kind of living in some sort of collective or even a personal simulation while we're in that storage, or even the idea that something rebooted, kind of like
mhm.
in the Matrix movies, and that now we're in a new version of the software. uh,
Yeah.
and then that you led you on a lot of different topics, and then eventually it got you into, as you went further down the rabbit hole, uh, that led you to the FOIA documents,
Mhm,
the
mhm,
Freedom of Information Act releases from the CIA in particular, but also I think the FBI. There's some
mhm,
interesting documents that talk about their experiments with what is it, remote viewing
mhm.
and the gateway process.
Correct.
And
Yep.
some of the theories that came out of those experimentations can also tie into that same idea of simulation theory.
Oh, absolutely. It's hand in glove with most of this stuff, particularly if you want to go the simulation route. And that's also too, why a lot of really big names in computer science or engineering or technology, they tend towards the simulation theory. On the surface, it may be, oh, well, they're just really hard materialists, and this is just one of the easier ways to explain the patterns in reality, explain the patterns in behavior, all of those things. But when you get deeper into the documents that were as, I mean, these are some of these documents are from the 70s. They knew about this stuff.
Right. The one
It's
that I
not
was looking
bad.
at the
Mm-hmm.
most was from, I think, 1983, is
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
the one in particular that I probably read the most of, at least. But there's several of them. And what do those documents say about simulation theory? Would like,
They more or less, if I had to summarize everything that I've read so far, I would say that they more or less, if you think about the way in which computer chips work, they work on ones and zeros, meaning they either vibrate a one or they vibrate a zero, and they go through a switch that either does that. And that determines the rest of how a computer apparatus works. Well, when you get into things like gateway and things like that, they talk about the left side and right side of the brain and how they vibrate. And whenever you get into a process where both sides of the brain that are usually in opposition, when they vibrate in harmony, then suddenly as they say, click out of space time,
hmm,
and you start to encounter, as they say, non corporeal intelligent entities. So
which
this lends it.
basically means some sort of intelligent entity that doesn't have a body.
Correct. That's exactly what it is. So you can call it, like I say, angels, demons, ghosts, aliens, whatever your liking is to it. That's what they call it, and that's what at least the papers I've read they've interacted with. For all I know, these are 40-plus-year-old papers. I would imagine they would continue to interact with these beings, whatever they are. I couldn't imagine, particularly the U.S. government, making contact with something like that, and particularly if there's something to gain, to just give that up. It doesn't make any sense to me. Having lived here my whole life, that makes perfect sense to keep doing it. So It's out there. A lot of bigger channels have now picked up on this. They're really running with it. Channels that can get over 1 million views, so it's becoming more and more known. And then once you really read the papers and you really let them soak in, if you listen to other experts, experts in physics, experts in astronomy, I mean, just really far-flung things. If you really listen to what they say, suddenly Carl Sagan, he's not just speaking in poetry, he's speaking in literal terms. When he talks about the difference between magic and technology is basically nil.
Right.
And
What was
if
the
you think,
famous quote? I think, was it Arthur C. Clarke? I think.
oh, sorry, yes, that's right. It was Arthur C. Clarke, correct.
Uh,
Yeah.
any sufficiently advanced technology will appear indistinguishable from magic to the
Mm-hmm.
lesser society, I guess you could say,
Mm-hmm.
the lesser
Hmm.
advanced technologically. Uh, something.
But that's
I'm sure he said it a lot more eloquently than that.
Sure. But that's looking backwards. Now, if you look forwards, then that takes you suddenly, you leap forward into the magical realm. And then ultimately, you have to start questioning. Now that I'm, working with these energies and trying to figure out what this is, you have to ask yourself, what I don't even know what the nature of technology is at this point. And I've never been a hard materialist, but I didn't realize until I read the papers and I started to get into different avenues of thought beyond, like the power of now or quantum healing and things like that. When you start to get into more harder topics, you really start to wonder what is the nature of technology? What does it mean to have a technological apparatus and what is its purpose, why was it delivered, and then you start getting into more fundamental questions. Where I'm at is what is an idea, how is it delivered to you, what does it mean to be a coherent and whole consciousness, because I don't think there's any coherence to it. I don't think there's one particular part to a conscious. And of course you can start getting into Jung and all that and saying that there's almost organs to there's your consciousness, your subconsciousness, your ego and all these other things, and they almost act as different organs that work together, like a liver and a kidney, and it just so you find yourself in really deep water pretty fast once you get into these kinds of things.
Right.
And then once you start working with energies and things like that, it really gets interesting. And then the even more profound questions can be pulled out of you.
Absolutely, I agree. Um, the it's like the questions just keep coming. Like the more
Yes.
answers you get, the more questions. And I know it sounds cliche, but it absolutely is true. Speaking of the way of thinking of aspects of the mind as like organs, that would be like the archetypes, right?
Hmm.
So that would be something similar to the images you would find in the major arcana, especially of the tarot cards,
Sure.
like the Hanged Man, Death, the Lovers,
Hmm.
all of these various different archetypal energies also represent elements within our own mind. And I think that the Matrix movies were trying to portray that in the characters of the movie, basically, of the various different. Um, well, the thing here is that they're doing a macrocosmic, microcosmic thing. On one
Hmm.
level, you can interpret it as everything is all different aspects of your mind.
Hmm.
Every single character in the movie is an element that represents one part of you, a different functioning aspect of your own psyche, you could say. And spoiler alert, if you haven't seen the Matrix movies, you should definitely see them, but I think most people have seen them by now. Um, by the end of it, it's all reconciled, essentially everything in the Matrix becomes one at one point, and then everything fills with light. And
Hmm.
so everything is consumed by the darkness, and then everything is filled with the light. So everything gets united in like a yin yang, and I think even at one point in the fight, they punch each other, and the rain turns into a yin yang or something, and they spiral up like the Kundalini
Hmm.
So something that I've realized as we've been talking here is that we're talking about some really high level things. We've dropped a lot of knowledge here, and I'm thinking that there might be some people watching that aren't quite sure what all of this that we're talking about is. So maybe we should roll back and then start
Sure.
with some definitions um, and work our way back up again.
Okay, sounds good.
So simulation theory
Hmm.
general is essentially what you find in the Matrix movies. The idea that we are living in some form of simulation. And that is the most broad, definition of it. And it can mean a lot of different things in a lot of different ways that it could be a simulation. And a lot of different religions essentially say that this material plane is some form of illusion already. Like that's part of the belief of a lot of people already. Uh,
Sure.
and this kind of takes it to another level, saying, well, that idea that what we are experiencing is an illusion, as well as the idea that we could all be living in a computer simulation, or the idea that we could be um, in some sort of immersive virtual reality machine, and uh, or that we could be simulated entities within a simulation.
Hmm.
So there's a lot
Yeah.
of different ways that the simulation can play out, but the most basic idea is that um, there is some sort of base reality, presumably, but that what we are experiencing is only a simulation of that. Maybe perhaps that it may be a reflection of of base reality, or it may have absolutely nothing to do with it whatsoever.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think what helps with that is the fact that everything is patterned. That kind of helps you along with that idea, everything is in a pattern, It's just the fact that we have night and day, that's your first indication,
Yeah,
you
speaking
know.
of night
And
and day, I'm just gonna get a turn on the light over here, get a little bit more light. 1 second.
sure.
Ah, much better.
It's
Oh,
pretty good.
much better. There we go. Okay. Yeah, so you were saying night and day. Yeah, I mean, like the idea, there's even on that level as well, that reality versus perception, that
Hmm.
even if you look at the sky and you see, with your own eyes that the sun rises above us and goes over our heads and then moves down and disappears, right? So that gives you the impression, it feels like we're still standing still and that the moon and the sun are moving around
Hmm.
us, right?
Hmm.
But
Yep.
and I suppose that's true from one perspective, but the math is a lot more elegant if you put the sun as the center.
Yeah, yeah.
It's a lot more complicated to calculate out, all those things. But I suppose you could say, in one sense, that it's true. It's just not as elegant of an answer, I suppose you could say.
Well, and I don't really I never really concentrated on sort of the outer, things beyond the earthly realm. Believe it or not, even though I talk a lot about aliens and all those things, and the reason why was I tried to concentrate on everything that I could sort of see and touch, in a lot of ways. And oftentimes, I found that the idea of outer space is a lot like time in that it's really just a kind of, it's like this abstract thing. It's not really a thing. It's like money. It's just something we've all agreed on for now. Um, because you can talk about space in terms of from where I am to where you're at, and it's still kind of theoretical. And it's not really there. It's not really a distance. It's only becomes a distance if you get on a plane and you fly over to me or you drive or something like that, that it becomes something that's real and tangible. Because you and I are interacting right now as if we're like 2 feet away from each other.
Yeah, as
And
if we're sitting in the same room almost.
it really is. We could be sharing a coffee and looking out at the window at passersby in a downtown somewhere. And again, we can't discount the interaction that we're having right now, even though there's a screen there. And I think one of the things that materialism has really robbed from a lot of people is that sense of being able to reevaluate your immediate environment and your immediate surroundings, and reevaluate what distance means, reevaluate what time means, and all of these other things. It's well, people have told me in the past, and I've commented on this many times before, you don't believe in the future. And I say, no, I'm always in the present, whether I like it or not. I'm always in the present. And well, I'll see you tomorrow. And then they would see me tomorrow. And I'm like, well, we're still in the present, and I,
Well, that's kind
I,
of funny because that reminds me of I was watching the first episode. I've only seen like half of the first episode of the TV show 12 Monkeys. Do you
yeah, yeah.
like based off of
Hmm.
the movie?
Hmm.
And there was one line where somebody said um, something about something already happening, but it was like a couple years in the future for that other character. And
Hmm.
she goes, "But that's in the future." And they said, "No, you're in the past. 2048 is in the future, or 2048 is the present. We're in the
Right.
past right now."
Yep.
And it was
Yep.
kind of funny from that perspective. From his perspective, everything between the time that he was currently experiencing and 2048, I think it was, what had already happened. It just hadn't happened yet at that point that he was currently experiencing. But to her, it hadn't happened yet at all.
And that goes back to the experiencer, and that goes to some of the quantum physics. The double slit experiment is when something is observed, it behaves differently than when it's not observed, meaning it's almost as if reality puts on its best suit, like it's Sunday best or something, when it knows it's being observed. That there's that joke, look busy, Jesus is coming back or something. And it's like, that joke is actually, it has some substance to it because, the double slit experiment showed that, particles at the subatomic level, they know when they're being observed and they act accordingly. And that is really weird. And that's part of what I'll talk about later on this week. And so I don't want to give away too much of that, but it's the idea. But if you take that at a macro level, what you're talking about is exactly that. Behaviors are different at different points of time and whether or not they're being observed. So the future is going to react differently if someone is observing it, although to them it's the present. And that's why on the channel I had said over and over again, the past, the present, and the future, they're all running across time at the same time. And, all of those, figures of history, known and unknown, they're all around us at all time now. And I often pondered if every now and then, those paranormal or parapsychology and all of those kinds of things, if in fact all they are echoes from other dimensions or versions of time that are right next to one another. Because if you go to the subatomic level, it's mostly empty space. Well, they're saying that there's dark matter, and that's most of space. Well, perhaps the dark matter is an inversion of this matter, and it could be different timelines, running alongside ours. Because if we are a simulation, if we are a hologram, if we are
And
an
so we could
electrical
be
impulse,
experiencing the gravity from those parallel universes that were
correct?
almost like in electronics. If you have two circuits that are running close to each other, then uh, an electrical current can jump between them, or can one
Yes.
can induce a current in the other one because they're close enough that the field affects between the two traces on the board.
Exactly. Exactly right. That's exactly it.
Now, I want to go back to that idea of observer and
Hmm.
observed. And tie it back into the simulation theory in these movies, The Matrix and similar ones. There's one movie that talks about this idea where there's a character in a simulation that had been created, and he gets told by somebody, um, he gets this message saying to drive out where you've never seen anything, where you've never been before, never even thought of going, just drive in that direction and just keep going until you can't go any further. And basically, he gets to the edge of the simulation,
Mm.
and it's just like it looks literally like a grid, like a matrix,
What a
um,
trip.
it just kind of fades out, right? And then it's just, and that scene has haunted me like forever. And I always thought, is there a way that if we were in a simulation, is there a way we could get to that edge of the world? Or would it just continue to render something as long as you're observing, you know? It would just continue, like you could go out into the furthest reaches of space and it would
Hmm.
and it would render for you.
Yeah. And it would probably render in accordance to your expectations, sort of like, have you ever seen those gerbils and they have that plastic ball and they run in the plastic ball on the ground, the ball keeps spinning with them? That's us. And it would just keep, the ball just keeps going a little bit in front of us, and we think, oh my gosh, I'm making such progress, and you're not. It's just you're running around in a ball. So that's, yeah, I think it would keep rendering, and I think reality knows when we're coming before we know we're coming. Somehow it knows, and it changes itself and rearranges itself in accordance to our expectations. Oftentimes people say in accordance to your will. So it just depends, and the more I look into it, the more I'm hard pressed to disagree with those kinds of things.
Now, expectation has such a huge role in manifestation of
Yes.
your reality. Now, in dreams, we can see that happening much more directly. So, if you're ever in a lucid dream, one way that you can manifest something into the dream that you've wanted to bring into the dream uh, is to expect it. So one of the things that I would do is I would look for some sort of transition point, like a door, like some sort of gateway, right? And a way for that item to come into my dream. And then
Mm-hmm.
I would expect, and it could be a person, and then I would expect them or the item to be on the other side of that door.
Hmm.
And then I would open the door, and almost always it would be there. And
Hmm.
because of the power of expectation, um, and the reality that I was experiencing conforming to that. And I always think about that Hermetic axiom, that which is above is like that which is below, or that which is below is like that which is above. For the performance of the miracles of the one true thing is the full thing. But usually people just say as above, so below.
Hmm.
And basically, what that means to me is that you can learn something about one plane of existence by studying another plane.
Hmm.
Now, I do feel like there are differences and things operate differently, but you can still learn something about one plane by studying the other. And so I feel like while the waking experience does show much more permanence and persistence than a dreaming experience, I do still think that that expectation has a huge role in manifestation of the reality that we end up experiencing.
And that kind of plays into the Mandela effect. I mean, you can't say the Mandela effect when it if you the thing about the Mandela effect is it started off with a lot of pop references, but as we moved on in the channel, we started to look into history and really more hard stuff, and we got into Anatoly Fomenko. He's a Russian mathematician, and we started to get into all these different avenues that were completely unexpected. And you can almost see reality itself shifting at a more higher vibratory pace and everything around it becoming more unstable as sort of meme culture and group consciousness and all of that comes about with the internet. And
The
I
singularity.
often, yeah, and I often think about exactly. And I often think about when electricity came around. And then, it was right around the turn of the 20th century. And then right after that, everything went topsy-turvy. And I think we're in something way bigger now with the internet. So I think that it's all connected, and I think it all goes back to what our expectations are, like you were saying, and it goes back to what we're thinking and where our minds are focused on, and then what our minds are willing to jettison. And as we were a lot of different individuals before the internet, and now we're kind of collectives, and we're different groups, and we can kind of, like silly putty, pull off one and then slap into another and pull off another, or like a lava lamp. And, and with that comes a kind of instability that I think is everywhere now. And I think that has a lot to do with the mind and expectations and working with that kind of technology. So,
What kind of technology? Oh, um, you're talking not just like technology in the conventional sense of the word, where people normally think of electronics. You're talking about things like technology such as the Monroe Institute's gateway process that we had referred to earlier, which we didn't actually really explain, but that is a method for astral projection, you could say. A
hmm
method of inducing out of body experiences in individuals through the use of what they call hemisync
hmm
technology.
yep,
So that
correct.
includes usually using headphones, but there are other ways you can do even without headphones. But um, there's a frequency following effect. So if you listen to a certain frequency, then it starts getting the brain waves to resonate in harmony with that frequency. Now, some of these lower level frequencies that we want to induce in our brain, we aren't capable of hearing those frequencies. It's below the threshold for uh, stimulating the nerves in our, you know, cochlea, right?
hmm hmm
But what they figured out was they could use a beat frequency where they have a slight variance in the frequency of a note being played in the two ears. And when those two notes are being played together in two ears, that the brain will actually hear that lower frequency note, and it's called a beat frequency. And you hear that beat frequency, and that can entrain the brain to produce more of that particular frequency.
hmm And once that happens and that frequency happens, that's when some pretty extraordinary things happen. I mean, your mind can, jump boundaries that, at the time of the writing they didn't think was possible. Certainly, if you're an occult practitioner or you're even in the new age or anything else with deep meditation, the possibilities are fairly limitless. But if you're a hard materialist, like an atheist or something, this would be just so beyond the pale that it's and it reflects in the writing of it.
Well, one of the interesting things, though, I think, is that it is somewhat approachable by an atheist as well because they're familiar with the idea of dreams.
hmm
And if you can talk about the idea of lucid dreams, because I personally I've experienced lucid dreaming and direct out of body experience directly from a waking state several
hmm
times, both of them. And I would say that it's the same state that you're entering into. Um, that expectation plays a huge role in what you end up experiencing, and getting into it in a different manner can change that expectation. I believe that's my interpretation of it, but it feels the same to me. I've experienced very intense lucid dreams and that felt extremely real and vivid, and I've experienced ones that weren't quite so vivid. And had the same level of variance in direct from a waking state out of body experience that sometimes is very vivid and realistic, and convincing, you could say, and other times it's a lot more low res, I guess you could say.
Mhm, mhm,
So I feel like that's kind of an approach that people who don't you don't have to believe anything to understand that dreams exist because everybody
mhm,
has them, or most people remember them at least one point in their life, and you can understand the idea that sometimes it's possible to become conscious that you are in a dream. And a lot of people will experience that during nightmares. Well, they'll be like, "Oh, this is so crazy. This must be a dream." And then they wake themselves up. And they're like, "Oh, it was a dream. I was right." And so that's a little mini lucid dream. And what they chose to do with that lucidity was to wake themselves out of that, to escape from that unpleasant situation. But
mhm,
what they could have done is they could have recognized the nature of a dream, and the implications of that being that they don't have that same level of danger to their physical being in a dream, and so they can be a lot more open to experiences that they have in the dream and maybe learn something about themselves through having a dialogue perhaps with a malevolent entity in the dream that they've encountered, and asking what's going on, and I found that even directing like unconditional love towards an entity in a dream really opens them up and gets them talking, and it's like you can practice that skill. There's a what is it called? Bodhicitta, I think, in Buddhism, where you can practice that ability to generate that unconditional love, and it's a tool. It's something that you can utilize in your work. It doesn't mean that you have to go around being uh, loving and completely loving to everybody all the time and live in that state. It's a
mhm.
practice, that you can uh, hone a skill and then utilize that skill when you feel that it's appropriate and useful. Um,
That's so funny you mentioned that. I just started to think about that like last week or maybe about 2 weeks ago, actually, at this point, about the nature of love and feelings, like genuine feelings, and how they are. Uh, I wouldn't say I'll use that term now, a tool, but yeah, you can accomplish a lot of things with sincerity. I mean, you really can. And and not be manipulative. Like be sincere about being sincere even though you're being sincere about what you want. There's sort of this weird stochastic jumping of that. But anyway, the point is there's a lot to that and there's a lot to feeling which adds in the power to those expectations like you're talking about in those dreams. There's a lot of power to that. And there's something about being in situations like that and being able to not being able to mask or be not genuine. And I think that's a lot of what makes people uncomfortable in those kinds of situations is because you can't mask. You can't, particularly a malevolent or a benevolent being. They're going to know anyway. So
right,
it's
right.
right. They're going to know. There's no
Yeah,
hiding
you
it.
can't really lie,
No,
to an entity in that kind of a situation. And
no.
now that we kind of almost glossed over it, but
Mhm,
before I want to bring this back up, and this is a bombshell thing that we dropped just a minute ago, and we kind of just talked about it and just kind of moved on. But before we do that, I just wanted to remind people we didn't mention it yet in this stream that you are going to be giving a talk on my channel this weekend
mhm,
for the Flambeau Noir
mhm,
International Left Hand Path Conference
mhm,
2021. So that's January 29th to the 31st. We're doing a series of live streams starting Friday night and going to Sunday night. And there's going to be a whole bunch of people giving presentations, and we'll do a live question and answer period after each, including yourself. And I just wanted people to be aware of that
mhm.
people that are watching this, that there is this upcoming event, if you haven't heard of it yet, Flambeau Noir, and you're going to be giving a talk there. And
Yeah.
now I'm super excited about that. But before I lose this train of thought, um, the bombshell that we dropped earlier there, and we kind of just continued talking like it was nothing, was the idea that the US government used these techniques to induce out of body experiences in their experimenter, the people that were conducting these experiments. And what happened was they encountered what they described as non-corporeal entities, or
Hmm.
entities that they believed didn't have physical bodies. Although I don't know how they didn't know if those entities were also astral projecting. You know,
Hmm.
maybe they do
Correct.
have a body, and maybe they're
Could
just
be.
making an assumption, right? But
Could
what
be.
they described as non-corporeal entities, they encountered them and they communicated with them, right? This is
Correct.
the U.S.
Yes.
government. The U.S.
Yes.
government used technology that they had available to them to induce out of body experiences and encountered non corporeal entities and communicated with them. And this is official government documents, right? This isn't just some crazy theory or crazy, whatever, like some crackpot idea that we just came up with from our own imaginations, right?
Oh yeah, no, this is a an official. It was the Department of the Army, headed by the DoD, and it was a CIA FOIA document called the Analysis and Assessment of the Gateway Process, and they did the analysis and the assessment of Gateway, and they went through the Gateway in 1984. No, the writing was from 1984. I think they went through the year before. I think they went through the Gateway the year before, and perhaps multiple times. I don't know. And then the dump was in the early 2000s from the CIA. They dumped it 1.8 million documents. They just dumped them, and I think it was from a lawsuit. And it was padding in the dump, and maybe they didn't intend to release this. Maybe I don't know what it was, but it the FOIA request was put in. They had to, by the laws here, they had to release it.
The Freedom
Yes.
of Information Act, right?
Yes. FOIA.
FOA.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Oh, Freedom
FIOA.
of Information. Yeah, I'm Canadian, so
Yeah. Yep. So they had to release it. They had to release it, and they left it mostly unredacted. They also have different ones. The one human problem, its solution, and the relation to the UFO phenomena, backward causality. I mean, it just goes on and on. Theory of Reality by Henry Pierce Stop, talking about Bell's theorem, analysis and assessment for the gateway process. You've got the psychokinetic universe, you got the round robin papers, and it goes on and on and on. And, there's a movie out called The Men That Stare at Goats, and they kind of downplay what was going on in the 1970s and the 1980s during the Cold War in the United States. And it's simply not, it downplays it and it's not realistic. They took it far more seriously. The Soviets took it far more seriously. Everybody in the West was taking it far more seriously. And they were actually sending soldiers through this gateway and to, project out and to do these different things. And
click out,
soldiers
they referred to it as.
click out. And I don't know, once they came, and they even developed techniques they called patterning. There's a technique called patterning, and what they would do is they would take 2 to 3 soldiers and they would click out. So they would go through the gateway, and then they would uh, through a toroidal field they would create, ultimately, almost like a an astral sigil, for lack of a better term, or like an astral umbrella
You were saying
that would,
three?
3 or more, I think it was. Yeah, they would do in groups, that they would advise people to do groups of 3 or more, and they would advise the soldiers to create a pattern, and that pattern would be able to insulate them so they could come back, almost so they didn't have the bends, so to speak. It's almost like coming up from deep water, so they wouldn't, because they said you can't go too far out and you can't go too long, or you would be dislocated from this current version of reality with devastating consequences. I've read that so many times. That line is literal, it's verbatim. So they knew the soldiers couldn't be out there that long, and they knew the soldiers would have consequences, like being in deep water. the oxygen in your blood, you get the bends and you get sick and you die. It would be sort of like that when they were out there doing whatever it is they were doing with these non-corporeal intelligent entities, but they would create this patterning interface. And by doing that, it would project their will into that reality, and then they were able to do the interfacing. And it's
So is
it,
this a device or is this a technique that they utilize, that they train themselves to use mentally?
It sounds like a technique to me. It sounded like a technique. When you read the document over and over again, it sounds like a technique. It's wild.
So I
It's
remember you showing that to me before, and I remember something striking me about it that it reminded me of the traditional triangle of manifestation in
yeah.
ceremonial magic, where if anybody listening to this isn't familiar with that, the triangle shape is used in classic uh, Solomonic demonic evocations. So basically, calling up, summoning demons using magic, and usually uh, calling upon the authority of God, that saying that you're on God's team and God's behind you, and you call upon the authority of God to bring up these demons or whatever, and then make them obey you or whatever, right? But in that style of classic magic, what they would do, or conjuring, some people called it, what they would do is they would use a triangle, a three, usually an equilateral triangle, and they would put holy names, like a classic one would be the Archangel Michael, they would put on one side.
Mhm.
Um, and the spirit was supposed to, they would call them into that triangle. And this wasn't done just in a physical space, like a physical temple where they had a physical triangle that they would, call the entity into. This would be done on the more subtle planes as well, like within, say, an astral projection or a lucid dream or a mental projection, whatever you want to call it, in your astral temple, even potentially, um, if people know what that is. And people will use a triangle to constrain an entity. Um, and that's very standard, and that's kind of across the board in all of those classic magic styles. The triangle was used to constrain an entity. And the passage that you showed me in that document from the U.S. government, that made me think of that.
Mhm.
That they had somehow stumbled upon the idea that if they had three people, they could form a triangle, and then they could kind of protect themselves in some way against uh, an entity getting too unruly, that they could kind of constrain it.
And they would do it on the other side. They wouldn't do it here. They would do it out there. So
Right.
that even adds to the strangeness of this entire episode. So if you don't mind, can I read a couple sentences from the document?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me just read a couple comments here.
Sure. Yeah.
Seamus Lucero said, "Are you familiar with the theory that Jack Parsons opened a portal that changed reality retroactively?"
Yes. Not retroactively, but I knew he and I believe Crowley, they said they opened up reality and a UFO flew in. Now, retrocausality is a very important element in all this, and that goes back to clicking out. So, again, in my own personal foreshadowing, I kind of tossed out linear time, and once you can do that, a lot of these documents go down much easier. You have to just kind of yield the floor and just let them go. So,
Yeah, it's
yeah.
interesting. That kind of ties into, in the occult world, in certain branches of the left hand path, they talk about acausal magic, meaning um, performing magic and the effect doesn't necessarily um, precede the cause, or the cause doesn't necessarily precede the effect, I should say. But that, either one works in this context. But
Yeah.
the idea that the classic example would be that you do magic to get, let's say, $500 because something came up and you really need $500 to cover some bill or whatever, and you do magic to get $500, and then in the mail that same day arrives a check from somebody that said, "Hey, I owed you some money. I threw a little extra in there for you. Thank you very much," or whatever. And the postmark on it was like 2 days earlier, right? And so you're like, well, did the magic cause that to happen because it was the exact amount that I needed and then the exact amount that I did the magic for, and it came right after I did the magic, that same day. Did I cause that? Because it feels like it, it seems like way too much of a coincidence, but it would have had to have started to take like it would have had to have happened 2 days earlier.
Hmm.
The
Oh
effect
yeah.
happened 2 days earlier for you to get that today.
Right.
So there's that idea. That's the classic example of acausal magic, and it's like that. The idea that magic can cause effect in is not bound by time in that sense.
Right.
And I find that the astral plane itself is not bound by time in that same way either. Like I've had lucid dreams where I've kind of rewound things and gone forward, and you can skip ahead, like skip big sections, and
Hmm. Hmm.
and even redo things if you want. And it's malleable. Like it's more like being a higher dimensional being, like you see sometimes in
Hmm.
movies. Like what was that movie with the guy who had the hat on all the time? When he took the hat off, his head was kind of hollow. Was that
Hmm.
Men in Black or something? Men in Black 3, maybe?
Maybe. No, I was thinking of the movie where he's his own god in his own mind, and they have to go into his mind, and they have to deal with his palace of his mind. It's a good movie.
Oh, yes. The it starts with a C.
The Cell, The
Cell.
Cell, The Cell.
Yes,
Yeah,
amazing movie. Amazing
yeah,
movie.
yeah. With Jennifer Lopez. Yeah,
Jennifer
yeah. It's
Lopez
yep.
and D'Onofrio, Vincent
Yeah,
D'Onofrio.
yeah. That's right.
He
That's right.
plays the psycho crazy,
Yeah,
you
and
know,
they got to go in his mind, and yeah, yeah.
right? And so creepy. He plays such a good role in that. It's
Hmm.
really well done, and that ties into the whole idea of the simulation theory as well. That movie,
Hmm.
kind of,
Hmm.
because they have people that are kind of jacked into almost like the construct that they use in the Matrix, right?
Hmm.
And
Oh
then
yeah. Oh yeah.
uh, it's kind of like this closed off space, but it's created you through the subconscious mind of that one guy, right?
Hmm.
And I imagine in the Matrix they could do something like that because they already have your avatar is generated automatically through the subconscious mind already,
Right.
right? So I wonder if they could do a setting, right, that would make the construct be created by your subconscious mind.
I would think that with, going back to what we were talking about, the technology was sufficiently sophisticated enough that that would certainly be probably a possibility that you were, and it kind of goes back into that scene where Keanu Reeves didn't believe he could jump off the building because once he could believe it, he could do it. So that
Right.
kind of plays into that. So
And I've
that,
had lucid dreams where I knew intellectually that I could just walk through one of the walls, right?
hmm.
But I had a really hard time actually doing it because there was some mental block. And
Hmm.
in that scene, Neo knew that he could because he saw Morpheus do it, and he was told, "Yeah, you can do it. This is a program." And he had experienced it enough to know that that was true,
Hmm.
but he still couldn't do it because there was still some sort of mental block holding him back.
And it goes back to reality when it was observed by him, and it was, under the accord of his expectations, it behaved such. So when he thought, I can't do it, you couldn't do it. When he said I could do it and he truly believed it, it happened. He was able to jump and do whatever else. So yeah, I mean, it's really funny too. You start thinking of all these other movies and they all have a consistent string that kind of a narrative that kind of runs through all of them. And it's,
Mhm.
and this goes
It's
back
very
to,
Gnostic.
oh yeah, very much so.
It's essentially the Gnostic myth.
hmm
So,
Very much so.
why don't you read that passage and then we can get into the Gnostic stuff just a little bit at least.
Yeah, sure. It says, talking about patterning, since we were talking about that it says here, in other words, the technique of patterning recognizes the fact that since consciousness is the source of all reality, our thoughts have the power to influence the develop of reality in time-space as it applies to us if those thoughts can be projected with adequate intensity. However, the more complicated the objective sought, the more radically it departs from our current reality, the more time the universal hologram will need to reorient our reality sphere to accommodate our desires. Monroe trainers caution against attempting to force the pace of this process because the individual could succeed in dislocating his existing reality with drastic consequences.
So essentially, that is like a psychotic break, I suppose you could say.
Yeah, you pushed it too far and you broke your mind. Yes.
Right. So the idea that, like, just as an example, if you were to say, um, change your waking experience to such a level where um, you fly, you know,
hmm
um,
hmm
it's totally possible that your body just kind of went limp, and now you think you're flying, but
hmm
really you've just broken your mind, and really you've separated your mind from your body or something like that, right?
Yeah, and this is saying that, while you're out there, don't go too far is what I get. And when you come back, you'll be able to reorient yourself because like you were saying, if you think you can fly out there and you can bring that back, that's not necessarily the case. However, if you're out there and you think you can give yourself a $500 check in a causal fashion, that's doable. That's more realistic. Changing the fundamental properties of gravity is not doable by one human mind. That's just not doable.
Right.
It's just not doable. So, at least not, the the kind of people that were going through at that particular time. But it does beg the question, well, what is possible then?
Right.
What, right? So,
So this also begs the question, what is real? And
right.
Morpheus, of course, has that, monologue where he says, what is real? How do you define real?
How do you define it?
If we're talking about what you experience, then it's just a series of electrical signals interpreted by our brain, right?
Yep, absolutely.
So how do we know what actually is real? And so, something that an insight that I've had, about that, all of that, about the nature of reality and perception, and what reality actually is, and what our experience is in particular, because it's hard to say what reality is, but we can say what our experience is. Um, and I've had a lot of experiences where I've even been in between states where I'm
Mm,
not quite awake and I'm not quite asleep, but I'm conscious. I'm experiencing things. In one of those states, I was in my room and I started hearing like witches cackling in my hallway, and I was like, "What the heck is going on?" And and so I, um, got a little bit afraid, and
mhm.
then suddenly there was this, um, dark goddess type figure in my room, right beside my bed, and I was kind of sitting up in the bed a little bit, and she came at me, and she was like covered in moss, and like, had like a tinge of green to her, and things like that. And she came over to me, and she was saying things like, "You're going to die, die, die," something like that, right? And it was quite frightening, but I managed to hold it together somehow. And I said, "I know," you know, like
I
what,
know.
what else do you say to that? Yeah, I know. Hopefully you don't mean soon. I didn't say that part, but I did say I know. And but at the end of that experience, I gradually came out of it back into a full waking state. So at one point, I was halfway, it feels like, almost like a sleep paralysis experience. So I believe that that was the state that I was in when that happened. Um, but is it real? Is the waking experience real? So this is the idea here. Okay, so when you are having a waking experience, like right now, presumably we're not dreaming right now, but maybe we are.
Maybe. It's possible.
So the light off of, say, your screen right now, is coming off of your screen, and some of that light, a very tiny portion of it, really, but some of that light gets into the um, eye and hits the rods and cones of the retina, and certain bandwidths of frequency and certain intensities of frequency will trigger the rods and cones in our eye to fire off an electrochemical signal that goes through the optic nerve and into the brain.
Mm-hmm.
And that raw data, the brain takes, like, basically finds patterns in it, and it represents those patterns symbolically through generating a fully immersive, um, multi-dimensional, dynamic map or symbolic representation of that data, of the patterns that it detects in that data.
Mm-hmm.
And that is our waking experience on the visual level. And of course, it happens with all our other sense organs. So they're all feeding data into the brain, raw data, and it's finding patterns and representing it symbolically to the conscious mind. And
Mm-hmm.
everything that we're experiencing right now
Mm-hmm.
is all internally generated. Even each other, the environment, everything, in ourselves, the character that you're experiencing, the waking experience point of view, that character is also part of that simulated reality that you are. Basically, it's a simulation running on an organic computer, which is the brain, and it is
Yep.
generating a symbolic representation of reality based off of that raw data. But there's no color in base reality. Like, there's no green
Nope.
in,
Nope.
in base reality. It that
Nope.
is only in our experience. That is only part of the simulation. Green
Mm-hmm.
is an experience, and experience is simulated, on
Mm-hmm.
the organic computer of our brain. Now,
It's
shut those data sources off, like, or mute them, lower the signal level, attenuate that signal to the point where the brain isn't paying attention to those sense organ data signals anymore, that data coming in from those sense organs. Um,
mm-hmm.
and then the simulation is no longer bound by that data anymore. And it's generating a simulation based off of, well, according to mainstream science, the random firings in the synapses of our brain.
Mm-hmm.
According to esoteric science, a lot of that signal is coming from uh, an external source,
Mm-hmm.
like a radio signal almost that our brain is receiving.
Right.
And so we can either be tuned to the local channel, which would be listening to the data streams from our sense organs, and generating a symbolic representation, a fully immersive symbolic representation of that, which is what we experience as the waking experience, or we can be tuned to the channel of the dreaming experience, which is unconstrained by the. It's almost like when you look at the night sky and the sun isn't there anymore, then you can see all the stars, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like when you're asleep and the sense organs essentially mute themselves, then we're able to see a whole other reality. Uh, but we're not seeing the reality, we're seeing a symbolic representation of the patterns found within that data stream. But it's a different data stream, you know?
Oh
So
yeah.
we can be tuned to the local channel or the other channel, because we don't really
Mm-hmm.
know what it is. I know a lot of it is internal stuff for sure because
Mm-hmm.
we're processing memories and we know that the dreams that we have, a lot of it is going to be based off of what we experienced recently, especially that day, and our habits and our predilections. They are hugely important in a dream. Like, we'll play out uh, our actions in a dream are essentially automatic reactions based off of the stimulus. We're not really acting consciously in a dream unless we're lucid because
Mm-hmm.
we're in a position of information deficit, right? We're not really in possession of the information that is relevant to the situation to give us power in that situation. Kind of like the Merovingian speech, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where he says, choice is an illusion created by those with power and those without. And you come to me without knowledge, and therefore you come to me without power. And it's true. He had been manipulated into that position the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
And his crew had no idea why they were even there. They knew, that there was supposed to be some key maker. You know,
Mm-hmm.
they were supposed to find out how to contact by asking the Merovingian where the keymaker was, but they barely knew what the keymaker was for or why the whole purpose of him going to the source in the first place. It was
Mm-hmm.
all a whole elaborate manipulation to control the dissidents
Mm-hmm.
in the system. And I think that, I mean, I'm just kind of going on a rant here, but I might as well keep going with it. um, the controlled opposition is something that takes a level beyond what I think a lot of people realize when they first watch that movie. When you watch it again a couple times, you start to realize, oh, wait a minute. And you do realize that. But on first viewing, I don't think you realize the level. That when you escape the Matrix, when you are freed, when you become a red pill in the Matrix movie series, and get into the real world. You've escaped the Matrix. The Matrix still has you. You are still being you're still in part of a system of control. Now, some people
Mm-hmm.
say that literally in the movie, when they get out of the Matrix, they're just in another Matrix, like another simulation. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but and that may be true. Like, I don't choose to interpret the movies that way, but maybe we'll see when Matrix 4 comes out. But either way, even if that is the real world, in that in the context of the movies, they're still in that system of control because Zion was created by the machines.
Mm-hmm.
And you can even see that in the design of it. There are these big tubes, and the doors of each apartment uh, are red, which
Mm-hmm.
are reminiscent of the the towers that have the red um, uh, pods that
Mm-hmm.
each of the people that are plugged into the matrix are living in. So they're
Right.
plugged into the matrix literally and living in red tubes, red pods on the inside of a tube, and they're doing the same thing in Zion. They're in a big tube and they're living in a red through a red door. You know, that's a sign that they put that in there that the machines created Zion. And you find out later the architect says it. And you find out that the previous one was a fraud that utilized religion to instill a system of control in the next generation of the next simulation, right? That
Yeah, yeah.
when Morpheus was like saying in the first movie, he was saying there was a time when there was a man born inside the Matrix that was able to remake it at will, you know, and he's the one that freed the first of us. Well,
Hmm.
he didn't free them. He just took them out of the Matrix and brought them to restart Zion because he had
Hmm.
chosen to save humanity rather than I don't know what the other choice is, right? He chose to,
Right.
I guess, go back into the Matrix and do nothing, right? It wasn't really much of a choice at that point for them, and I think that that's one of the big things in that movie is the illusion of choice
Mm.
versus um, actual choice. And I think that once they get to the level of information and lucidity and they really understand what's going on, then that's the point when they can actually start making real choices.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah, I agree. I think I like that idea that, controlled opposition
Hmm.
and that it was created on purpose and it's intentional and there's really no way out.
Yeah, and it that also reminds me of Dark City. Have you seen that movie?
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
And there's that city that nobody can get to, Shell, or not city, but there's that place, Shell
Yep,
Beach, and
Shell
that's
Beach.
kind of like the equivalent of that edge of the world or edge of the universe
Yep.
idea,
It keeps
right?
changing as you keep getting pushing and pushing and you think you're getting somewhere and you're really not.
And everybody
It's
thinks that they know how to get there. They're like, "Oh
yeah,
yeah, I remember being there," you know. And then
yeah.
you go, "How do you get there?" And you go, "Oh, you just go to." Wait a minute, how do you get there? And like everybody said that.
Yeah. It's like the Truman Show where he gets to the edge of the
Oh,
water and he,
right.
it's all, see, I think there's just this, I don't know, whether it's intentional or not, there's a thread in a lot of these sort of stories and they're saying something really profound in them. And, they're there if you have eyes to see them. A lot of things are. So that's really what it's all about.
Oh yeah. So getting back to the dream thing. So what we're experiencing right now is a dream, but it's being influenced by data coming in from our sense organs,
Hmm. Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and when we go to sleep, uh, we have dreams that are not influenced very much by our sense organ data.
I like that.
And then when we wake up again, we're still dreaming. It's still that same, all the same functions of the brain that generate the dream are also generating the waking experience.
Hmm.
It's all the same circuitry of the brain.
Yeah.
So that's why some people say, "Oh, how did I have a dream that felt so real? Like,
Hmm.
why did it feel so real?" And uh,
And you bring that emotion back.
yeah, and I've had those dreams too, where I've been. There was a lucid dream I had one time where I just dropped to my knees and was like in awe of the magnitude and beauty of the simulation. You know that
Hmm.
it was so magnificent and so realistic and detailed that I was like, how can I ever be 100% sure whether or not I'm awake or asleep? And really, even when we're awake, we're dreaming. It turns out.
Hmm.
What right now we're dreaming right now. The only time we're not dreaming is during like deep dreamless sleep, and that's when the dream generator or the hologram generator or whatever you want to call it, the experience generator,
Hmm.
uh, that's when that is not operating.
Right.
And according to Tibetan Buddhist practice, you can actually be conscious during that phase, like a lucid dream in a sense, but a lucid non-experience in a sense, where it's you don't have the experience generator function of the brain operating, but you can still be conscious, and, and there's nothingness, you
You could get lost. I would be afraid to get lost in that,
know.
not knowing a way out. You just hope the system kicks back on. You do a reboot.
Well, that's, I have a friend that said that he kind of accidentally fell into that one time, and he just started, it felt so uncomfortable that he just started manifesting things. And it became almost like his own personal holodeck in a sense. Um, Basically, he was like so uncomfortable with the nothingness that he created a dream to fill in the void. Nature harbors a vacuum, right? They say.
Yep, that's right.
Uh,
That would be uncomfortable.
and
That would
I
be too
think
much.
sometimes when we have those leg kicking things, sometimes
Hmm.
it's because we had a dream where we fell into, tripped over something. But I think sometimes um, it's because we enter into that non-dream state, but
Hmm.
consciously. Like we're still conscious, but we're in that non-dream, non-experienced state for a moment, and we don't feel the weight of our bodies on us. We
Right.
don't feel that ever-present gravity, um, and it's not being generated by a dream either, and so that gets interpreted as falling,
Hmm.
and then the mind quickly generates a dream out of it, like that you tripped over something, you know.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And then
Kind
your
of pull
leg
you out of it.
kicks or whatever, yeah.
Yeah. It's the mind's attempt to pull you out of it, so to speak, out of the nosedive. Are you there?
Yep, yep.
Okay. Cool. Cool.
So I was just looking at some of the comments here. Um, Somebody said earlier, oh yeah, Kenjay said, haha, we are all in Minecraft survival mode. How do we get to creative mode?
Yeah. Absolutely.
So I love that because it's like, well, you get that coherence maybe, right? So that's one of the things. If you found out that you were a character in a dream,
Hmm.
maybe somebody else's dream. That's
Hmm.
the other thing too is we presume that the simulation that we're having as a waking experience and in the dreaming experience, we presume that those experiences are being generated on an organic human brain
Hmm.
in base reality. But we don't know that. Or
No, we don't.
maybe we are in a brain, but maybe it's in a jar and we have electrodes plugged into us. The famous brain in a jar thought experiment, right?
Sure.
And we would never know. This is kind of the same idea as the Matrix, except for um, instead of just a brain in a jar, there is still the full organism,
Hmm.
but essentially it's the same thing. The jar is your skull, and the brain is in that. And essentially that's what it is right now. Like without being plugged into the matrix, essentially we are a brain in a jar.
Right.
That jar is our skull, and the wires going into it are the nerves of our body and that are sending signals into it, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think I like the idea of the brain being a kind of it picks things up. It's kind of
Like an antenna.
like an antenna, like an antenna. Yeah, I like that concept. I think that's pretty close to how I feel about it. Like we're not here, but it's kind of an antenna. So it kind of puts us into the hologram or into the matrix and then we kind of spring into action there is kind of how I think about it.
Right. It's like we're jacking into the matrix,
Hmm. Yep.
plugging into it.
Being sent into it. Yeah.
And I feel like that we get caught up in it, and I feel like that we believe it to be real. Like when we experience our experience, most of the time we're interacting in our experience as if it were base reality. right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Mm-hmm.
what else can you do, right?
Right.
You,
Right.
but you can be aware at least.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Oh yeah.
so I think that we get caught up in it so much, even if we've recognized, made that realization, well, actually, everything I'm experiencing right now is being generated in my own brain, you know? Um, Even though it's based off of data coming in, it's still internally generated representation. Like I said, there's no green in base reality. That's
Mm.
all part of the simulation. And we can be aware of that. And I think that being aware of that idea, just like in a lucid dream, if you are more aware of the reality that you're being presented with, then you have you're in that position of power a lot more.
Mm.
You are in that position where if you can understand what you're experiencing and the implications of that, then you can do things that you formerly thought were impossible. Like
Yeah.
in a dream, you unlock God mode, right? Or like like creative mode, like in Minecraft. Instead of survival mode, you're in a non-lucid dream, you're in survival mode. You think that things can hurt you. You
Mm-hmm.
think that there's scarcity, you know, that
Sure.
if you don't realize that you can just will a, an apple into existence, or
Mm-hmm.
not even eat an apple and it doesn't matter because it's not going to nourish you in the same way
Yeah.
because you realize that. But normally in a non-lucid dream you don't realize that, and you act on these ideas of scarcity and survival and things like that that you become freed of when you recognize the true nature of the reality that you're being presented with in a lucid dream, and you kind of
Mm-hmm.
unlock that creative mode.
Mm-hmm.
And I think
Yeah.
you can unlock that creative mode in your waking experience at least a little bit if you can recognize the true nature of the reality that you're being presented with. Now, to get further into that, the implications, we were saying that you could be a brain in a jar with electrodes feeding information, right? But
Mm-hmm.
what if it's even beyond that? That's even thinking too small in a sense. What if um, there's no brain? What if there's some sort of, let's just say for convenience sake, a computer,
Mm-hmm.
and that computer has simulated entities, such as
Right.
simulated humans, and though each of those simulated humans has a simulated brain,
Mm-hmm.
it's very detailed. It's emulating a real brain, like it would actually work in the physical world, and it's operating and it's processing things.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe there is no physical brain. Maybe the simulation is running on a substrate, a completely different substrate besides an organic computer brain. Maybe it's on something entirely different. Maybe the universe itself is a computational process. Maybe one giant computer in the literal sense of the word, not like a bunch of electronic microchips and things like that, but it's
Mm-hmm.
like it's actually performing computational processes that are of such a level of complexity that it gives rise to uh, these simulations.
It's crazy stuff, man. You could go on and on and on for days with this and
Oh
just
yeah,
not get to the bottom of it. I've been down the rabbit holes, man. I know what you're I know it, man.
there's so
I've
many different tracks that we touched on here that I thought of something that I wanted to say, like that gets a lot more deeper into it. Like several times, I'm like, oh, we could really dig into that.
oh yeah, I mean you could go years. And you had mentioned doing this a couple more times or something and kind of getting a thing going, but
Yeah,
yeah, cuz you
people
can
fan people here in the chat. What do you think? Do you want to see, or if you're watching this as an archive later on, would you want to see more episodes? Maybe episodes with SMQ and I, maybe tackling a specific topic and digging really in depth into that particular thing, like maybe how it's a Gnostic uh, um, parable or whatever, or a Gnostic story, and maybe comparing it to other movies that have that same arc. And maybe another one, maybe we get into the idea of being able to remake the Matrix at will and how that applies to occult techniques in real world. Or, any of these various different topics that we could get really into. Would any of you guys be interested in that if we did like a series of videos together on this? Um, Oracle said yes. Awesome, yes. Oh, somebody said, ever tried 360 vision in a lucid dream? I did one time, not intentionally, where I was having a conversation, kind of like you and I are having a conversation, SMQ,
Right, right.
and we were talking about some really deep things, which, of course, if I can't remember it after waking, of course.
Hmm.
But,
Naturally.
yeah, but during the conversation, um, the person I was talking to was talking, and I realized, oh, this is a dream. And being Canadian, I was polite and I let him finish what he was saying. And I said, okay, I know this is breaking topic a little bit, but uh, do you know that we're in a dream right now? And he was like, oh, well, if we're in a dream, you know, then is this your dream or is this my dream? And then that kind of blew my mind. I was like, whoa, a dream character just asked me that, you know? I thought it was my dream, but that actually makes me question things. And what I ended up doing was I didn't know the answer, and I was kind of scrambling mentally to come up with something, and I threw the question upward toward some concept of some higher aspect of myself or some more pure wisdom element of myself or something, right? I was like, help, like, I don't know. And then I got a response. It was almost like in nature, there's this thing that happens where a tendril of electrons will come up from the ground and meet the sky, and then the lightning bolt travels down
Right.
that channel essentially that was
Hmm.
created by those electrons that go up. So the Earth actually goes up to meet the sky and then creates a channel for that lightning bolt to come down. And I kind of feel like that's kind of what happened in the dream, where I asked a question and then that wisdom came down through that channel I'd opened up for opening up to wisdom. And the answer, and I said it to the person like yourself that I was talking to, and I said, if this is truly a dream, which I believe it is, then it's no more your dream than my dream because we are both one. And then I saw him go, whoa, like, and he was like contemplating the idea, and then it clicked in his mind as well,
Hmm.
like that epiphany moment kind of thing. And when that clicked, we became one mind, and
Right.
we were kind of facing each other, so we could kind of see through each other's eyes, and it became that kind of panoramic 360 view. And I woke up in that state, and I was walking around. I remember going to work that day, and I was downtown Toronto working at the time, and I was on the subway, and I was remember looking at all the people and just thinking, like how much of that is true in the waking experience as well. And I carried through the day that concept.
Yeah. It's unlimited, man. And I've been down quite a few rabbit holes myself, so certainly it can be pretty overwhelming.
Yeah, well, I think that this would be really fun to do some more of,
I think so too.
and I feel like we're kind of running to the end of this thing here. I feel
Yeah,
like
I
it's
got
kind of winding down here.
yeah, I got things kind of knocking on my door out here, so yeah. So, yeah.
Well, I really appreciate you coming on to the live stream to talk about
Hmm.
this topic with me. It's something that I spend countless hours contemplating. Simulation theory, the nature of reality itself, all this stuff. It's
Yeah.
wild.
It's very wild, and it's and sort of some of the rabbit holes you went down. I've been down them, and it's worth going down. It's worth these exercises are worth doing. They're not in vain. It's truly it's something that's worthwhile, I think, because oftentimes you'll come out with a piece of gold. So I
Yeah,
think it's
absolutely.
yep.
It's transformative. I
Hmm.
feel,
I do
and
too.
experiencing those altered states as well, I feel transforms you. It's
Hmm.
like every time you kind of have a lucid dream, something changes. It's an
Hmm.
alchemical process, I feel.
Alchemical, yes, absolutely. Yep.
Okay, well, thanks again for coming on the show with me and talking
Yeah.
about these things and indulging my fandom.
Yeah,
and,
man, it's cool.
and so, if people want to see you again, talk about what are you going to be talking about this weekend for Flambeau Noir?
So I was going to try to bridge a little bit of occult knowledge with some of the documents and give
Mm.
more detailed quotes of the documents. Not too long, not run on and on, but just kind of give examples of some of the documents and kind of weave it with some of the occult work that I've read thus far, and try to make sense between the two bridges that are, I think, or the two worlds, but it's not really. It's all the same thing, and it overlays perfectly. So I was just trying to do those to kind of do that, go in that kind of direction.
Well, I remember at one point you were talking about in the community that had kind of built up around the stuff you were talking
Hmm.
about, that these Freedom of Information Act documents, along with some of this other stuff that's related, almost forms a corpus of a new mystery school in a sense, or a modern
Yes.
mystery school. I love that idea. And I think that a lot of these concepts that come in through these pop culture portrayals of these processes and these age old ideas like Plato's cave and the what is it, Descartes' demon, I believe,
Hmm.
and all those ideas that we've been talking about. I feel like that kind of can tie in as well to that whole corpus.
I think so too. I think eventually, I mean, hopefully before the end of our lives, each of us will be able to kind of piece more and more together as we go along. So, I mean, it's astonishing how much all of this ties in together. It really is.
Yeah, it's really cool how the convergence of it
Convergence.
all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely. Yep.
Okay, great. Well,
All right.
you have a great rest of your evening, and thanks again for coming on to the show.
Yeah, well, thank you for inviting me, and I look forward to talking to you and talking to everybody else later on.
Thanks. Yeah, and everybody, until next time,